call the roll.
Senator McGarvey, Senator Nemes, Senator Schroeder, Senator Storm.
Present remotely in my home district.
Thank you. Senator Thomas, Senator Wise.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Blanton,
Present in the room.
Representative Fleming,
Present remotely, not in my district.
Hold on one second.
thank you. Representative Hatton,
Present remotely in my district.
Representative Jenkins, Representative Riley,
Present remotely in my district.
thank you. Representative Sharp, Vice Chair Howell, Vice Chair Beckler,
Present remotely in the district.
thank you. Co-Chair Carroll,
I'm here in the room.
and Co-Chair Nemes.
Present in the room.
Thank you.
I will next take a motion to approve the minutes from the June 10th, 2021 meeting. Got a
So moved.
motion from Senator Nemes and a second from Representative Beckler. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, like sign. The minutes have been approved. So we're meeting today to hear an update on supports for community living study that's been ongoing, and we have people from the Department of Medicaid Services to testify. But before we have those folks take the mic, I will turn this program over to our committee analysts, Van Knowles and Shane Stevens. Gentlemen, you have the microphone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Van Knowles, Committee Analyst for the Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee.
And I'm Shane Stevens, also an analyst for the committee.
Our presentation is a summary of staff activities on the Supports for Community Living study, which is described in a memo that is in your packet. SCL is one of Kentucky's 6 Medicaid home and community-based waiver programs. These waivers allow a state to waive certain federal Medicaid policies for members who would otherwise live in an institution. Waiver programs like SCL provide support services so that members can live in the community. In March 2017, the Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee, then known as Program Review, authorized a study of reimbursement rates for private providers in the SCL program. In the same month, Kentucky Medicaid contracted with the consulting firm Navigant to recommend ways to redesign all of Kentucky's waiver programs, including SCL, and develop a new rate methodology, that is, a new way to set reimbursement rates. In 2018, the General Assembly funded a 10% across-the-board increase in SCL rates. In 2019, Navigant completed its work and presented its recommendations. There were objections from providers which delayed implementation. In 2020, COVID-19 contributed to further delays, and LRC created a task force that met during the interim to look at the need for exceptional services in the Hcbs waivers. This year, a new legislative task force has begun work to develop recommendations for the redesign of all Medicaid waivers. Kentucky Medicaid has stated that a redesign would begin no earlier than 2022. Because plans affecting SCL rates were repeatedly made and delayed, staff proposed to close out this study without a formal report. The committee could reassign the topic after a waiver redesign and a new rate methodology have been in place long enough to evaluate. While waiting for Kentucky Medicaid to establish a new rate methodology, Legislative Oversight staff analyzed and reported on the SCL rate history. Staff also attended the working group meetings that Navigant held with providers and DMS to discuss their rate study. Staff reviewed Navigant's findings and obtained feedback from providers. Staff monitored the meetings of the related task forces over the past 2 years. Staff presented their main findings to DMS. The DMS response and staff's Replies to their response are on the last page of the memo in your packet. I will briefly go through the history of SCL rates from 2004 to 2017. Staff analyzed claims data provided by DMS for that period. During that time, there was no across-the-board rate increase. Instead, some rates were adjusted up and others were adjusted down. Some services were combined and some were created by splitting an existing service into other more specific services. This happened mainly in 2006 and 2014. The 2014 restructuring was phased in throughout the year. It included designating the new service array SCL2 to distinguish it from the previous program. Monthly spending per member generally increased during the period, but corrected for inflation, the amount spent declined between 2006 and 2014, then stayed about the same. The rate of increased spending before 2006 was significant. With the restructuring in that year, the rate of increase slowed. After the transition to SCL2, the rate of increase went up a little, but it was still far less than 2004 to 2006. Without information about provider costs, however, we cannot say how this affected provider earnings. Staff's analysis of broad types of SCL service showed trends related to the rates for those services. A good example is residential family care, also known as adult foster care. Residential family care showed a large rate increase in 2006 and another significant increase in 2014. The value of those increases was partially eroded by inflation. Providers indicated that over time, more members were served in family settings because the reimbursement was greater than for group homes, and the costs to the provider were lower than for other residential services. The area at the bottom of the chart shows that greater use of this service began with the 2006 rate increase and accelerated after the 2014 rate change. It went from less than 5% of total SCL spending to almost 25%. In the 2018 budget bill, the General Assembly authorized and funded a 10% across-the-board increase in SCL rates. The new rates have continued since that time. Providers responding to questions from staff gave a mixed review of the 2018 rate increase. More than half thought that more was still needed, and some mentioned the need for future cost of living increases.
In addition to examining reimbursement rates over time, this study also investigated DMS compliance with federal rate-setting guidelines. Two important guidelines set requirements for Medicaid reimbursement rates. These guidelines come from the federal regulations and the Social Security Act. First, Medicaid reimbursement rates for Hcbs waivers must comply with federal regulations requiring that any state's plan must describe the policy and the methods used in setting rates for each type of service. Further, these plans are required to be reviewed and updated every 5 years. In addition, Medicaid reimbursement rates for these waivers must be consistent with the Social Security Act, which requires that payments be consistent with efficiency, economy, and quality of care, and be sufficient to enlist enough providers so that services are available to the extent that they are available in the public. During our study, staff determined that there was currently no methodology in place for setting Hcbs waiver rates. Although the waiver rates were published in Kentucky Administrative Regulation, the methodology used to calculate them had not been published for any fiscal year since 2001. It was also determined that this was a requirement for compliance with federal regulations. Further, DMS was unable to provide the methodology and calculations necessary for reviewing and updating waiver rates every 5 years, also a federal requirement. In response to these findings, DMS has stated that the SCL waiver program has so far received federal approval for all applications and amendments. However, it is possible that affected parties could seek legal action against CMS even after the approval of a waiver plan, provided there is reason to believe that the approval was inappropriate. In addition, CMS may adopt stricter interpretations of their regulations in the future. In 2017, following HCR 100 and the committee study, DMS contracted with Navigant Consulting to provide recommendations for an Hcbs waiver redesign. At this time, committee staff began observing and evaluating the rate-setting process. The following year, Navigant presented its initial assessment and was authorized to develop a rate model. And in 2019, Navigant released the rate model and the methodology recommendations. On February 13th of 2020, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services announced that the waiver redesign had been put on hold indefinitely, with the Cabinet reporting that based upon stakeholder input, they were reevaluating the recommendations of the study to ensure that they were beneficial to all stakeholders. Prior to being placed on hold, the Navigant rate study recommended a number of changes to Hcbs waivers. The most significant changes were a consolidation and standardization of service categories and rates across waivers. To this end, the study proposed adjustments to both rates and services and funding for waiver programs, with some rates and funding increasing and others decreasing. The give-and-take nature of these rate adjustments were largely a result of DMS's requirement that the rate model be budget neutral across all of Kentucky's Hcbs waivers. If some rates were increased, others were necessarily decreased in order to maintain no change in the overall total waiver budget. This created an artificial constraint that resulted in a model that failed to account for the actual costs of providing services. Moreover, the adjustments that the Navigant model recommended were fundamentally built from direct care wage data collected from providers. Unfortunately, building rates in this way can be misleading, as wage data tend to reflect existing reimbursement rates, and as a result, if current rates are too low, then wages and costs will be artificially depressed. Providers also expressed this concern to committee staff, asserting that the survey data that they had provided to Navigant failed to accurately capture their costs. Since placing the rate study on hold, DMS has also indicated that a budget increase would likely be required to bring rates for all services up to the highest rate currently being paid for that service by all waivers. Doing so would standardize rates for all services across all waivers without reducing the rates of other services and waivers to do so. In addition to the requirements to codify and maintain a rate methodology, the Social Security Act also requires that these rates allow for a sufficient quality of care. A significant factor in providing that care is the availability and quality of direct care workers. Even though market wages are similar to those paid by SCL providers, these jobs experience high turnover, making it difficult to retain workers who have needed training and experience. Moreover, other jobs with lower levels of stress and responsibility offer similar or higher wages, which reduces the availability of direct care workers. A focus group of caregivers for adults with autism reported to staff that they were able to hire and maintain reliable direct care workers by paying them significantly more than the market rate via the Participant-Directed Services Program. Information from DMS confirmed that participant-directed care workers do receive significantly higher wages than SCL provider workers. Staff also surveyed providers regarding the effect of the 2018 rate increase. More than half reported that they had passed on all or most of this increase onto the direct care worker wages. and they reported a significant improvement in workforce stability as a result. Also, several recent reports have recommended increasing wages for direct care workers in order to maintain a stable workforce, and some states have recently considered or enacted a requirement that Hcbs waiver rate increases be passed entirely to direct care workers. Ultimately, these findings suggest that an increase in direct care worker wages is likely crucial to improving SCL services and reducing wait lists. In conclusion, at the time staff received direction to study SCL rates, Medicaid was embarking on a process to redesign these rates. Staff conducted an analysis of previous and current rates and observed the redesign effort, which is now on hold. Any redesign implementation is not expected until 2022 or later, and so further study of current rates or the previous redesign efforts may not be meaningful. Staff propose to close the SCL study without a formal report for now, leaving it to the committee whether or not to reauthorize a study after a completed design has been in place long enough for an evaluation. And this concludes our presentation.
We can either take questions now or after the cabinet's presentation. I have a few questions, but I'm going to hold mine. So at this time, yep, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is pertinent to the last comments you made. I guess the concern with not actually preparing a report now is the historical value of what you all have done as the process moves forward. You all feel confident that the data, the information that you all have collected will be available as we move forward through the process with the waiver design. I think there are lessons to be learned from what has already happened because basically we have been chasing our tail for many, many years on this issue without, we've studied, and we've done nothing that made any significant difference. So is there any value to going ahead and completing the report now as a tool to be utilized as we move forward?
The staff presented in 2018 a report, an update basically describing the information we were able to obtain by that time, and the memo in your packet summarizes what we've learned since then, provides an update to the 2018 information. The memo will, of course, be available, as well as that 2018 report modified, corrected for some errors that were in it. So that information is available.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I'll ask one question now, and I'll also ask this of the commissioner or one of her staff. I think you mentioned that since 2001, a required report that's required from the federal government hasn't been submitted. I think it was along the lines of setting out our basis upon which we do the reimbursement rates. Is that correct? And why hasn't that been submitted since 2001? And have we had communications with the cabinet to determine whether they're going to start complying with that federal requirement?
That is accurate. But as DMS responded, up until now, all of their applications and amendments have been approved, despite not filing the having the methods on file and the methodology for creating them and a process for renewing them every 5 years.
Okay. And to that end, we noted that any affected party can challenge the federal approval. Have we heard any mumblings or has any affected party reported to us or reported to the cabinet, to our knowledge, that they intend to maybe challenge the approval?
Not to our knowledge.
And has the Biden administration made any statements that they might be reviewing previous federal approvals?
Not to our knowledge.
Okay. All right, thank you. And obviously you guys stay in the room because there will likely be questions for you at the end. But right now, is Commissioner Lisa Lee with us remotely?
Hi, yes, I am here remotely from my office.
Okay, Commissioner, I would ask you first to identify yourself for the record, which we know who you are, but your team, and then you have the floor.
I'm Lisa Lee. I am the Commissioner for the Kentucky Department for Medicaid Services, and I have with me Pam Smith, who is the Division Director for Community Alternatives, and we also have Kelly Rodman, who is our Legislative Liaison. And we do have a presentation that we can go through based on the waiver and some of the redesign activities. And first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your interest in this very important topic. You know, Kentucky Medicaid is the only program that covers home and community-based waiver services that allow individuals to remain in their home. And we currently, in our 6 waivers, we currently cover a total of 25,917 individuals. And I know Senator Carroll made a comment that we have studied this, and we've taken little action. And I think that as we go through the presentation and we talk about the waiver programs, we get a general idea of just how complicated not only the programs are, but the complex medical needs of the individuals that we serve are. The individuals in our home and community-based waiver services are some of the most vulnerable and complex individuals that we serve in the Medicaid program. And as such, we're very careful anytime we make changes to the programs, because first and foremost, our concern is for our members and the services that they receive, because everything that we do here in Medicaid is for our Medicaid members. And we strive to make sure that we're delivering services that improve the lives of those that we serve, because that's why we are here. So again, I do have a presentation. If I could do it, do I have authority to share my screen, or do I have to have the committee share the presentation for me?
You can share it. I'm being told you can share it, Commissioner.
Okay, let me try. Sometimes technology is great when we can do. Let's see if I can get my presentation up. Can you see my screen? And can you see my presentation?
Yes, ma'am. We can see it in the room.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll go straight to
and I would note, Commissioner, before you get started, for the members, I believe this slide presentation is also in the packet. Thank you.
Thank you. So here, 1915C home and community-based waivers, as you heard from our previous presentation, they are designed to give individuals with disabilities an alternative to institutionalization. We do provide services that allow individuals to either remain in their home or community rather than going to a long-term care facility. And the services that are available complement the Medicaid program services. So, for example, I like to say that the Medicaid program actually has about 2 different components. We have the state plan services, which provides medical services such as physicians, doctors, pharmaceuticals, therapy services to individuals who are enrolled in Medicaid. Individuals who are enrolled in a home and community-based waiver have additional services that are not available to those individuals who only receive traditional state plan services. So those home and community-based waiver services include, for example, homemaking services, attendant care, those sorts of services that individuals need a little bit of help with just to make sure that they can remain independent and in the community. And again, we do have 6 home and community-based waivers. Those waivers are listed here. And as I stated earlier, we have over 25,000 individuals in our waivers. Today, we have been talking about the SCL waiver. As you can see, we have at the bottom, we have supports for community living, and we also have the Michelle P. waiver, who serve sort of the same individuals, and those are individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. And one of the differences in Michelle P. and SCL is one does have a residential component, which SCL does have a residential component. We also have a model waiver too. That waiver is for individuals who are vent dependent for 12 or more hours a day. Our acquired brain injury long-term care and our acquired brain injury programs are for individuals who are 18 or older with an acquired brain injury. Our HCB program, that's the home and community-based waiver, is for individuals who are 65 and older or individuals with any age with a physical disability. Here's a little graph showing how we spend our money by waiver program and the number of individuals who are enrolled in the program. So the left side of the screen is the population served. So for example, you can see in the Michelle P, we have 10,212 individuals, and that makes up 39% of all individuals enrolled in our waiver programs. On the right side of the screen, you can correlate the Michelle P spend to $342.4 million a year, and that's about 36% of the spend in the programs. You can see that our SCL program has 19% of the enrollment, but yet accounts for 41% of the spend in all waiver programs. So why do we want to redesign the programs? First of all, we do have some wait lists for the waiver programs. As you can see at the Michelle P waiver, we have about 7,441 individuals who are on the wait list. We also have an SCL urgent wait list. Those individuals can be, the individuals on the Michelle P are first come, first served, but the SCL wait list individuals can be placed on that list depending on their need. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the resident expert, who is Pam Smith in the Department for Medicaid Services, and she can go through the rest of this slide. And Pam, if you just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide, I will advance for you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do want to, before we go off of the slide, want to make a comment. I know Senator Carroll, we had talked about before the average time on the Michelle P waiver, about that number, and it just did not get updated in this slide. We talked about that that calculation, and that it does give kind of a false interpretation of how long individuals have been waiting on that wait list. If you go on and go to the next slide, please. So the goals of waiver redesign overall, and I think these are going to be, these will be consistent as we begin waiver redesign. I think these are our goals just in general, to have a stable waiver program to serve our individuals, enhancing the quality of care that they receive, implementing consistent definitions across waiver. We want to look at a universal assessment and individualized budgeting. And this also means looking at a validated assessment tool so that we can make sure that when we do get to a point where we can have more individualized budgets, and it can be the budget for an individual can be solely based on their assessment, that we do have a strong assessment to do that. Cost containment, we have a set number of funds, or a limited amount of funds, and we always want to be fiscally responsible and make sure that we are providing the best services for to as many people as we can for that set amount of money that we have. We want to continue to diversify and grow our provider network. We want to have consistent provider funding, and that goes across all waivers. So we want to avoid the interpretation that one group may have better access to services or have access to different funding than other programs. And we want to optimize our case management to support that person-centered planning. That is, person-centered planning is the center of HCB and is critical to its success. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, and so now just to talk about where kind of the redesigned timeline, and this was kind of touched upon in Mr. Knowles and Mr. Stevens' presentation. The waiver redesign began in February of 2017. The assessment report and recommendations came out in August of 2018. Go to the next slide, please. So to talk about what we have done to date. So there have been some things that we have been able to do. One is we implemented an ongoing stakeholder engagement process. In one of our trips around the state, one of the stakeholders said something to us that has rang true and that we took to heart. And I keep this lens through everything I do with the waiver, which is nothing about us without us. So it's very important to us that we have that stakeholder engagement process, and that all individuals that have a part of the waiver, whether it be a provider, it be an agency such as us or one of our sister agencies, down to individuals that are receiving waivers and individuals that are hoping to receive waivers and the individuals that support them. We switched service authorizations from a third-party vendor to the state and to case managers. So this allows services to begin quicker. Case managers were trained and were given a set of guidelines, and within certain parameters, they can approve services from the beginning on the person's plan of care. Services that are more clinical in nature or that fall outside of those parameters come to staff at the cabinet to review and approve. We streamlined incident reporting and moved to an electronic reporting system within our Medicaid waiver management application. We've had ongoing training for providers, case managers, and our internal staff. We've expanded the MWMA access to all providers. So now not only case managers can be in that system, all providers can have access to that. We updated the patient liability calculation from 100% of the FPR to 300%, which essentially wiped out patient liability for all of our participants. The last review that I did, we had less than 50 people that still had a patient liability, and those range from, they could be as little as $1 up to some. We had some that still had significant patient liability amounts in the hundreds, but those were very few. As was mentioned earlier, the comprehensive rate study and recommendations for the new rate methodology that was completed, and those findings were published. Go to the next slide, please. We operationalized the 1915C waiver help desk. This is a help desk that is staffed within my division and in Medicaid, and we answer both participant, case manager, family advocates, calls from just about anyone, as well as we operate a help desk system, help ticket system, where they can email in and we respond to tickets. We have completed a rewrite initially of applications and the supporting regulations. Those will serve as a foundation as we continue waiver redesign. We won't be starting from scratch. We at least have some work already started there, such as making definitions consistent. We've developed resource materials for providers, participants, and internal staff. We've become very good at developing what we call our one-pagers or quick reference guides. We try to have those out there for anything system-wise, or to guide an individual, for example, from I've just had my assessment, what do I expect next? Those types of guides. We've done planning and implementation of MWMA enhancements. We continue to work on MWMA enhancements, and that is both for internal efficiencies as well as efficiencies for the providers that allow them to serve our members better. We formalized a grievance and appeals process and moved our reconsiderations to an independent third party. So actually staff in the Office of the Ombudsman at the Cabinet conduct all of our reconsiderations for waiver, and that just allows so that there's an absolute independent view looking into any denials that request a reconsideration. And we've introduced updated service definitions, policies, procedures in the home and community-based and Model 2 waiver renewals. We actually, within the last couple of weeks, received approval on our Model 2 waiver renewal. And I, this morning, just submitted our home and community-based waiver renewal back to CMS with our response to questions that they had. So we're looking forward to getting our response back on that.
That is the end of our presentation. A couple of things I'd like to point out is for those, the MWMA, I know we have a lot of acronyms here in Medicaid. The MWMA is our Medicaid Waiver Management Application. That is a computer module that allows our waiver providers, case managers to go in, insert case notes, and actually just manage the care of those waiver participants. So it is a great tool that we use for our waiver programs. And when we talk about budget neutrality, so the waiver redesign, the Navigant study, it encompassed more than just rates. It took an in-depth look at all of our waiver programs, all 6 of them. They analyzed the administration of those programs. They also looked at rates and methodology. And when we talked about budget neutrality, and if we had implemented some of the recommendations around rate reimbursements, for example, in order to implement those recommendations within the current framework and within the current budget, we would have to have shifted funds from one provider group to another. And so when in January of 2020, when I came back to Medicaid to serve in this capacity as commissioner, I was approached by a few waiver providers who were very concerned about that approach of shifting funds. And so we decided to take a pause and take a step back and see what we could actually do within the current framework, within our current regulatory guidelines and approvals from CMS, and then look at what we could do going forward as our waivers we need to look at them. We know that we need to make some changes and do some redesigns, always hampered by budgetary constraints. But recently there has been an initiative. We have submitted a spending plan to CMS. I'm not sure if you're aware that there's a home and community-based waiver under the ARPA funds. We have 10% of our state spend that we can draw down additional federal funds for our waiver programs, but it's a one-time spend. We cannot, for example, add waiver slots using that money because that would be something that would need an ongoing funding. But I'll let Pam talk about some of the opportunities that this funding provides for us and some things that are in our spending plan that we think may help with provider retention as we move forward with our waiver programs. Pam?
We looked at some pretty basic immediate needs, and one is workforce, obviously, that we need to address. There is a critical workforce shortage, and it won't matter what new services or what we do with rates or really anything else we change with the waivers if we don't have providers there to deliver the services. So we looked at addressing that immediate need. We wanted to invest money in being able to look at all of our current services. That will incorporate looking at rates again, and whether that is someone that takes the Navigant study and looks at that and builds upon that, or we do a completely new rate study. That is still left to be determined, but we will be looking at rates again. We wanted to invest a significant amount in our behavioral health services, so looking at partnering on with mobile crisis initiatives, the 988 initiative, and how we can build our crisis services to better surround our individuals. We also wanted to do a feasibility study on potentially either restructuring or adding some additional waivers in the future. One is for severe mental illness, and one would be targeted at children, and one would be targeted at supporting individuals with chronic medical conditions. So we wanted, funds to be able to go to that feasibility study to see what it would take to do that. And then lastly, we would want to have someone come in to help us with the project management of this. There's a lot of reporting that has to be back to CMS. We have to report each quarter and update to the spending plan, as well as looking at our PACE initiative. We wanted to bring in project managers to look at that as well. and to help us, support us as we continue with the Waiver Redesign Task Force, just to advance those efforts forward and to help us with, really best practices, what other states are doing that is innovative and what we can bring to Kentucky. And so it will be managed across the agency. So we will have individuals from the Department for Aging and Independent Living, our Department for Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities, as well as staff from Medicaid that will work on this very large project. And we're looking forward to hearing back from CMS. Our plan was submitted on Monday. CMS had said they wanted to respond quickly to those, but you can imagine how many plans from states they got all basically at the same time. So, but we are looking forward to hearing back from CMS on that, on those initiatives.
With that, would be happy to take any questions and to have additional discussions related to the waiver programs.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Director. Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Lee?
Yes, yes.
Yes, this is Senator Thomas.
Yes, Senator Thomas.
Here's my question to you. I think as a legislative committee, we have to acknowledge that in the 21-22 proposed budget submitted to the governor, he actually had in there an additional 250 waiver slots for the Michelle P. Waiver program, another 50 slots for the SCL waiver. Okay, when we adopted the budget, and I do mean we adopted the budget, we eliminated all of those requests by the governor. Now I have constituents, and I'm sure everybody here has too, really wants more waiver slots. We have over 10,000 people on the waiting list, and yet we, as a General Assembly, didn't increase the waiver slots by one in this past budget. My question to you is this, as the Commissioner of Medicaid Services: are you and Secretary Friedlander going to go back and encourage the governor in the upcoming 22-24 budget to again request waiver slots for the Michelle P. Waiver program and for the Support for Community Living program, and encourage this General Assembly to create more waiver slots for the fiscal years 22, 23 and 23-24?
Well, as we can see, the waiver programs are definitely very important to the population we serve. We do know we have a waiting list. I think as we go forward to the next session, we will evaluate all of our priorities in serving our Medicaid population, and we will put forth recommendations that we think are necessary to continue to serve our population in the best and most efficient manner that we can.
So I think that's a maybe. Senator. Okay, Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner, my last statement was not meant as a criticism. It was meant to be factual. And I believe me, I understand the complexity of the balances that you all have in dealing with all this from a parent perspective and from a provider perspective. How do you remember, or do you have the number? How much money was the cost? What was the cost for the Navigant study that was done?
Thank you, Senator Carroll. I didn't by any way take your comments as criticism. I think they're just factual. I think that the waiver programs are the most complex programs to administer in the Medicaid program. I think we all realize that, and I still appreciate your all's interest in these programs. And I would have to defer to Pam regarding the rate, how much we paid Navigant. I think that's your question, how much the department paid Navigant to conduct that study. And I think there definitely was a contract with a set dollar amount. Pam, do you know right offhand how much that contract was?
For the full three, because we did a 1-year extension, I believe it was around $6 million, but I can find that out. That's just kind of off the top of my head. I would need to go back and look to get that dollar amount. But Senator Carroll, I'm happy to do that and provide it to you.
Okay.
And that was over a 2-year period, Pam?
It's over a three. It was
three-year period.
3-year period.
Okay. And, I appreciate the way that the approach that you all have taken. I think it has been very, very inclusive of all the stakeholders throughout the state. So the process has been great. It's just the fact is we're not really making a lot of progress, and we're as we move along, there are more and more problems, I guess, that are piling up as a result of us not making the progress. And I think there are some excellent ideas pending that are being looked at, and I think some things that are going to make the programs much more efficient and the services much better for those who receive the services. And then also obviously a focus on providers to make sure that there are providers, because I think everyone's well aware that over the last year we have struggled in that area, and we have lost providers throughout this state. There really does need to be action taken in that area. What do you all see from the Navigant study? How has the focus changed as far as what the priorities are, and what can we pull forward from that study that will be beneficial in the next phase of the review and the redesign?
So I think definitely we need to look at our assessments and rate methodology. I think, for example, we do not have a child-specific assessment. Some of the concerns when we start looking at that, of course, we want to be very thoughtful and methodical as we go forward, because our any change we make has the potential to impact over 25,000 lives, and we want to make sure that there's no disruption in their care. But it could be, for example, when we implement a child-specific assessment, we may have children fall off of these waiver programs because they no longer qualify. That is a really big concern of ours. Some of these children have been receiving services for several years. So we need to really be careful when we look at that and implementing. I think definitely having a consistent rate methodology across provider types. Currently, we do have some reimbursement methodologies that vary based on waiver, even though the providers delivering the services they're delivering the same service, which creates gaps in care, because some providers, if they're going to receive more money, for example, delivering services to an SCL waiver participant, then that leaves a gap in some of our other waivers because those providers want to go to the waivers that deliver more or pay a higher reimbursement. So I think those are definitely some of the focus, but always at first and front center is the member and how we are taking care of that member and meeting their needs. Also, and I think, Senator Carroll, you hear me say this all the time, that my philosophy is the Medicaid program was created for the Medicaid member, but we can't take care of our members if we don't take care of our providers. So definitely a focus on assessments and reimbursement. And I'm not sure, Pam, and then person-centered care too, making sure that these individuals are receiving a plan of care that meets the needs tailored specifically for them, rather than having a blanket set of services that can be applied across the board. Pam, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I would definitely agree about the person-centered planning. We, too many times see providers falling into the, okay, you're on the SCL waiver, so I'm going to take down this is your menu of services, this is what you get, and not focusing on what's important to the participant and really what they want to do. And how they want their services. So really incorporating that. And then really my big thing is making sure that while each population is unique, and there are going to be some services that are unique to the individual, seeing just that equal access to service and equal opportunity among each of the individuals, regardless of what reason they're on a waiver, but that they have equal access to providers and equal access to services, and that there's not any that feel like that they are not as important as another group. So really that equality amongst the populations.
One more quick, and just to get a little bit more specific into one service, I'm hearing from case managers that oftentimes their responsibilities are continuing to grow and grow and grow, And there are concerns that they feel like that they're not able to provide the quality of services maybe that they have in the past because of all the increased demands on them. Are you all addressing that? Have you had conversations about that? And it's getting more and more difficult to hire case managers, and especially with all the added responsibilities that they have.
We have specifically been looking at case management over the last year during the pandemic. We've seen some very innovative case managers, and we've also seen where we have some big holes in case management where we've realized we need to step up the training and the support of the case managers. And I think too, we're going to look at, is there a cap we need to put on how many individuals a case manager can have on their caseload? I recently did a report, and it varies wildly amongst the waivers and amongst agencies. And, there comes to be a point where to serve an individual well, you need to have, you can't have more than a certain amount on your caseload. What that number is exactly, I can't say off the top of my head right now, but I think we're also looking at a way for, value-based payments. And is there something we can do in particular with case management on the acuity of the individual they have? So for example, if they have someone that has more needs, like there are no natural supports, or the natural supports really lack understanding or aren't able to help the waiver individual, that they have to be more involved, that they could have a lower caseload, and that they could receive a different reimbursement for that individual versus someone who has a strong natural family supports. And really it is just more of a coordinating their services and a touch base, once a month. Is everything going okay? What else could I get you? So really looking at how we have case management structured. It's a difficult job, but it also is one of the most important jobs in waiver, because they are the connection between everything.
I agree with that completely. And I appreciate both of you so much for always being willing to answer questions and being available when you are needed. And you have a very difficult job. But obviously, from the number of times that you all testify before committee, there is a lot of interest in moving these programs forward and making sure that we're providing efficient and quality services. So know that you have the support within the legislature, and I appreciate your priorities, and I truly do thank you for what you do, and from a provider's perspective and also from a legislator. The priorities are correct, I think, within the state, and there is, I agree, there's a financial component that does have to change, and I think we can only be so effective until that component gets caught up with the ideas that we have. And so I think that's where we're struggling right now. But I will stop there. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for indulging me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony. I was just at a provider this morning, Harbor House of Louisville. Had a visit there. My question is, what have we seen since COVID? I know COVID was really, really devastating on some of the infrastructure that we have in place to take care of folks, and what changes you're seeing, and as we come out of COVID, to make sure that important infrastructure is still there. And also a little primer for me on how we pay for these services. What percentage is general fund money and what percentage is federal funding?
Pam, I think you can probably answer most of those.
So it's federal is about 70%, so about 70 cents of every dollar is federal and 30 cents is state. As far as the infrastructure and the providers, what we've seen on the positive side, we've seen some providers be really innovative, and it's been inspiring, because I think it's going to shape how we go forward. For example, telehealth and the place that it can have in the home and community-based programs. Some of the remote patient monitoring, those types of programs. So I think it's going to shape how we move forward. we are really starting to look now on as far as providers, and we have lost some providers, unfortunately. Hopefully, we're going to be able to bring them back, but we are really now just starting to get deep into the analysis of the services that were utilized during the pandemic. Our providers, some of them stepped up and actually started providing additional services because we were able to allow that through Appendix K. So we're really starting to look into that and to see, what we need to do differently. Hopefully we can get some of our providers back, because unfortunately we did lose some of our smaller providers.
Before we have any more questions, we're going to allow our final presenter to present. So, Amy Stade, welcome home. You can leave the legislature, but this is always your home. Amy, identify yourself for the record, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My name is Amy Stade. I am the Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of Private Providers. Representative Jenkins, Harbor House is a CAP member. CAP is a statewide nonprofit organization, trade association, representing 1915C waiver providers who provide services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, primarily through the supports for community living and the Michelle P. waiver, but to a certain extent also through the home and community-based waiver. CAP members support over 10,000 individuals with disabilities, employ over 9,000 Kentuckians, and have really played an essential role in keeping these individuals safe and healthy during the COVID-19 pandemic and far before then. Just move through this. Many of you have heard this already, so I'm just going to apologize for repeating it numerous times. I'd also be remiss if I did not thank the former Representative Jonathan Schell for sponsoring the resolution that has brought us here today to that necessitated this program review. He is probably not watching this, but I thought I'd thank him anyway. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on waiver providers. As you all heard, we were struggling before the pandemic. In 2018, SCL waiver providers received the first rate increase they had in 14 years. That rate increase many of the reimbursement rates are still lower today than they were in 2006. So providers are making do with, lower than 2006 rates in 2021, cost of doing business and wages. A May 2021 CAP survey, so this is a little old, but May 2021 CAP survey revealed that COVID-19 has impacted waiver providers significantly in two ways: revenue and workforce. 91% of our respondents reported that they'd experienced a significant revenue reduction, specifically related to the COVID-19 pandemic. They reported an average lost revenue of $682,000. That's significant for a provider that operates on a paper-thin budget. Providers also reported, the majority of providers reported that they also were experiencing significant workforce problems. I'll tell you, since May, when this survey was done, we're in all-out crisis right now. 86% of providers report that they cannot hire qualified individuals despite offering sign-on bonuses, etc. 77% of those are residential providers. These are 24-hour care. So we have residential providers with employees who are working over 100 hours a week just because they don't have enough bodies to fill shifts. Only 2.8% of waiver providers report that they're fully staffed. 50% of providers report that they're critically understaffed, and I'd say since May that's increased. Respondents have also reported that they have an average of $22,000 per pay period in overtime related to the pandemic. Again, that's significant when you've lost revenue and have increased overtime costs. Our waiver providers have struggled for years to recruit and retain qualified direct support professionals. It's not a new problem. We've been talking about this for years, but now we're at a critical level. In 2019, Kentucky's average Dsp turnover rate was 47%. That's higher than the national average of 42%. it's still high regardless nationally, but we're still higher than the national average. Why is this happening? Because DSPs have low wages and it's emotionally and physically demanding work. This has a significant impact on the lives of the individuals with disabilities. A recent research from the Council on Quality and Leadership has shown that high turnover affects the health, safety, and welfare of individuals with disabilities and leads to increased instances of abuse and neglect, emergency room visits, and mental health crisis. DSP workforce also affects an individual's ability to access waiver services. If there's no workforce, there's no services. To your question, Senator Thomas, you asked about waiver slots, and waiver slots are so important. They are so important so that people have access to services. But I'll tell you, if you allocated 10,000 waiver slots today, about 50 of them could get filled because of the critical workforce shortage. Sure. Sure, absolutely. Just a note on that. We have providers active who have capacity, who have significant capacity, who are turning down referrals because they don't have this care staff. This workforce shortage has obviously also had an impact on providers. So we're operating with critically low staffing levels, significantly increased overtime costs as a result of that, with significantly reduced revenue. And also there's a really significant cost associated with frequently onboarding employees. We have to run background checks on every employee. Absolutely, we should have to do that. We have to do drug screens and we have to do the training. Those federal background checks are not cheap. I think they're about $50 per check. And a lot of times what we're seeing happen is an individual will come apply for a job, the employer will run all the background checks, and then that employee just disappears. They won't show up for the training, or they'll quit day one of the training. And so then we're back to square one of spending all of this money up front to try to recruit a qualified employee. And the employer is just out that cost. Obviously, we've got a significant impact on wait lists too. Like I said, providers have turned down referrals despite having capacity, and we cannot meaningfully address our wait list until we ensure that we have enough DSPs to support the services. And the only way to address DSP workforce is wages. Right now, Kentucky's DSPs make about $10 an hour. While that may have been sufficient in 2018, that is not sufficient in 2021. You can go anywhere in the state, Starbucks, Burger King, Walmart, McDonald's. They're all offering thousands of dollars in signing bonuses in about $15 an hour. Waiver providers cannot offer over $10 to $11 an hour, especially when you factor in the fact that nearly 100% of their employees are making time and a half via overtime. The rate does not support that. The only way to increase wages is to increase the reimbursement rates, because these providers are 100% Medicaid funded. There's no other reimbursement stream for the majority of these providers. They have no other way to bring in income so that they can raise wages. And if we don't attract a quality workforce, care is going to suffer. And I also want to stress there's a lot of talk about cost containment, etc. In Kentucky, home and community-based care is the alternative to institutionalization. Institutionalization costs about $1,200 a day. The waivers cost about $215 a day for the same level of care. The waiver itself is the cost savings. Kentucky created the waivers to save money. It's not a question of whether or not we're going to provide this care. This population of people will always need care and assistance from the state of Kentucky. It's a question of how we're going to provide the care. Are we going to choose institutionalization, which is not effective, is not what's best for the individual, and is going to get us in a world of trouble probably with the Department of Justice, and it's way more expensive? Or are we going to choose the community-based care that's $215 a day and better for everyone involved? I just urge all of you to consider some long-term funding for these programs. We have to increase the rates to increase the wages, and that's also going to involve regular cost of living adjustments. Like I said, STL got a rate increase in 2018. Here we are 3 years later, and we need more money. It's just not effective for providers to have to come to you all, and you don't want to have to deal with it every 2 years. You don't want to have to deal with another $20 million budget proposal every 2 years. Any rate structure needs some regular evaluations of the validity of the rates and the ability to increase them regularly for cost of living. I'll take any questions you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tate. Isn't that what that report was supposed to do?
Yes. Are you talking about the program review report or the one to CMS?
The report, Navigant report.
Yes. I can go into that a little bit if you'd like.
You can, and then I'd like the commissioner to go into it as well. Go ahead, Ms. Tate.
Sure. So I was on the rate review committee and participated in the Navigant report. So I can talk a little bit about what went on behind the scenes, and this is not a criticism of anyone, the commissioner or Ms. Smith at all. They largely weren't involved with this. Pam Smith was, but not a criticism of her at all. These comments are directed towards Navigant. We were not allowed to, it was not open. We were not allowed to tell anyone outside of the 8 people that were in the work group what was discussed, what was talked about. So we couldn't submit. I wasn't allowed to solicit feedback from my members about what was being discussed about the rates that would affect them. 2, as Ms. Smith and the commissioners alluded to in their presentation, there was a budget neutrality constraint placed upon Navigant that said that they could not spend any more money than was already being spent. So all that they could do was shift around the dollars being spent to help out some waivers that were significantly underfunded. And those waivers definitely needed that rate increase. Additionally, Navigant sent out a rate study document. And the way that the questions were asked, really showed that they did not understand the way that the services were being provided. And so providers were not able to accurately report their cost of doing business by the way that the questions were asked. Additionally, when providers did accurately report their cost of doing business, Navigant frequently responded to them and said no. It's impossible that you spend this much money on this admin task, or it's impossible that you spend this much money on transportation. Revise your answers and send them back to us. So when people were honestly reporting the money that it spent to run their programs, Navigant told them that was not okay. All we asked of our providers was to be honest with your costs, and apparently honest costs were not considered. So there are questions about the data.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you. As far as the budget neutrality in the study that was conducted, I'm not sure what the previous administration stated, but most likely had something to do with operating within the current budgetary confines of what we have allocated to the current waivers. But I think Ms. Smith was definitely involved in the bulk of the budget study. So I think I'll have to defer to her for her comments on this question.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I want to provide a little bit of context to, so the reason that individuals who were on the rate study were asked not to share the information that was brought forward was to prevent. So without context, a lot of the discussions may not have made sense and could have been misinterpreted by other individuals. Looking back, was there different ways that we could have done that or could have shared data? Yes, there probably was, and that's a lesson learned from that. But I do believe that the intent really was to prevent any misinterpretation of the data. As far as the survey, there was a pilot group, a pilot study that was done with a group of providers that provided services in all of the waivers, as well as there were multiple trainings. And then I actually was privy to and have the data that was submitted as part of the rate study and the communications. And so, Amy, if there were any providers that were told to change their answers, I would love to see that communication from them, because I did not see any of that in what I saw in the responses from Navigant. So I definitely would be interested in seeing that. And I will say the rate study was very hard for a lot of our providers. There were a lot, in particular, the smaller providers that really didn't have the, I'm trying to think of the right word. They didn't have the expertise or hadn't really participated in a rate study. It was a very it was a comprehensive study, but there was a lot of information that it asked for, and so I think we battled some of that as well. But we definitely, I would love, Amy, to hear if you have any providers that have that communication and any other feedback as we go into looking at that again, to not make some of the same mistakes again, and just to better the process as well.
Senator Thomas.
Ms. Stade, I appreciate the importance that you've placed upon this study, and your remarks. I will tell you that I'm beginning to hear a similar theme here in this committee. Last month, we heard from the restaurant industry, and their refrain over and over again was, we have a labor shortage here. It's caused by wages. We got to do something. This month, it's Medicaid and the same refrain. We have a labor shortage due to wages. We got to do something. Okay. So I got a question for you, and then I want to come back, and I got a tough question for Ms. Smith I want to probe. What do you want us to do? What do you want us to do to address the wages? If you could answer that question for me, please, I'd appreciate it.
And when you're done, I have an answer as well.
And I would love to hear from you, Jason, on that.
It's coming.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to remember that restaurants, and while they have been through the ringer with COVID, and I certainly sympathize with that industry, they can raise prices to increase revenue to pay their employees more. 100% Medicaid providers have no ability to charge more. They can't charge the Medicaid program. They have no way to increase revenue unless Medicaid increases the rates. Because again, most of these providers are 100% Medicaid funded. So to answer your question, what's the solution? Actually, last session, Representative Riley filed a bill that I worked with him to draft that would work to increase DSP wages to $15 an hour. So the way that was accomplished was through a rate increase that providers were then required to pass 75% of that increase on to the direct support professional workforce. You asked why 75%. That extra 25%, one, allows them to increase the wages of their management staff. So we don't deal with wage compression issues, because when you increase the bottom, you have to increase everyone. And just the way that legislation defined the direct support professional, that was necessary. Additionally, it allows them to pay for the increased payroll taxes that come as a result of increasing wages, so that providers did not actually experience a revenue reduction as a result of raising wages. We plan to maybe find someone to sponsor similar legislation this year, or work with the General Assembly on a budget appropriation that would require providers to pass along 75% of a wage increase to increase wages.
Yeah, I think you did, and then I'll chime in my.
Ms. Smith, I got a very tough question for you. Last night, as part of my homework, I read the executive summary of the Navigant study, and I got to tell you, Ms. Smith, I was not impressed. Okay. One thing I didn't hear you respond to, and it was mentioned either by Commissioner Lee or by Ms. Stade or somebody, that all the Navigant study did was just, rearrange the marbles. It did not address any increase in funding. So I'm curious to you would you see that as a viable solution to a problem that's existing if all you're doing is rearranging the marbles and not really getting to the fact that you've got these problems out here that are related directly to the need for additional revenue?
So let me answer in two ways. One, I will say the reason you saw that from Navigant is that was the direction that we were given by the leadership in place at that time, is that was all that was what we could do, was essentially rearrange the marbles. Is it a viable option? No, it's not a viable option. And I think that we have, we've spoken in some of the other testimonies that we've done before some of the other committees, is that we have to have additional funding. Our wait lists continue growing. Ms. Day talked about how long it's been since the SCL providers have received a rate increase. Some of the other 6 waiver providers have not had an increase in over 10 years, some of them up to 15 years. And in fact, some of the providers on the Hcb side actually had a rate decrease when services changed in 2016 in that waiver. So no, I mean, funding is essential, and just rearranging the marbles or rearranging the tiles to the puzzle, they won't fit. And it has to, in order for us to improve these programs, funding increase will have to be a component of it.
Thank you. So I have a comment, and if anybody would like to respond, good. And then I've got a litany of questions. I'll ask maybe some of them and then reach out to Director Rodman with other questions. And it seems to me that a rate increase is certainly a part of the equation. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's no getting around it. These providers don't sell widgets. They don't have other sources of income. It's Medicaid reimbursement. So we have to do our part once again in the General Assembly. So that's a criticism of the General Assembly. There's also, in a short term, we can get something done immediately. When I talk to providers in my district, when I talk to restaurant owners in my district, when I talk to any employer in my district, I say, what's going on? How's business? Tell me what's up. They all say the same thing, and there's not one difference. They're all singing the same 8-bar every time. We can walk outside today, go to any business in Frankfort, and the owner will sing the same 8-bar. Fix unemployment. Stop the federal kicker. In the states that have went away from the federal kicker, their unemployment rates are going down. So we need to do a few things, as simple as stop the federal kicker. That will incentivize people to go to work. The second thing we can do, and this came from an owner in my district, of a business in my district. She said, I had 20 interviews scheduled yesterday. This was last week, so it would have been, not was yesterday, but it was early last week. I had 20 scheduled. She said, Jason, how many you think showed up? I said, 12, 13. She said, 2. The other 18 didn't show up, but they got an interview, so they checked the box. She said in Tennessee and some other states, employers can log in to the unemployment system and say, I'll use myself as an example, as if I were a hypothetical job applicant. Jason Nemes had an interview, didn't show up. That goes into Jason Nemes's application. I lose my unemployment. Those people who are not showing up to interviews should lose their unemployment. That's what it is designed to do. It's even worse in this world where we're talking about the providers, because they have upfront costs, whereas the owner I was talking to had time, maybe a little bit of research. These providers have background checks. They have real costs that they've already put into that applicant. And then the applicant doesn't show up because they don't want the job. They want the interview so they can claim, and they don't want the interview, they want the scheduled interview so they can claim they're trying to get a job, because that's one of the requirements for unemployment. So the governor could do this tomorrow. Stop the federal kicker and allow employers to report dishonest, fraudulent people who should no longer be on unemployment. It'd be pretty simple. And I would say this is the last thing. We do not have a labor shortage in Kentucky. We do not have a labor shortage in Kentucky. It's not even close. Our workforce participation rate in Kentucky is abysmal in the best of years. We've got to get our people working. They're eligible to work. They're qualified to work. They're smart enough. They're physically able. they're not working. This is able-bodied, age-working folks. Our workforce participation rate is one of the worst in the country. With COVID, it's much, much worse. So we can address those issues very quickly, and I think rather simply. The longer-term, harder thing is the increase in the rate. We also have to do that. I have a question, if I might, for Miss Smith. This is a different issue. I don't know what this means, so I wrote it down, and I'm going to probably mess up a little bit of what you said, so make sure I don't do that. You said something like, we used to have 100% of liability, and now it's 300% of liability for participants, and that wiped out their liability. I don't have any idea what that means, so help me understand that.
Okay, so part of when an individual applies for waiver, it's similar to if they're in a nursing facility. They their income standards are higher than it just being on traditional Medicaid, but as part of that, they calculate they could be on Medicaid but have a patient liability, which means they are, this much above what the standard is. So say, for example, and I don't have the numbers. I wish I had the numbers right here in front of me. Let's say before it was, they could have $730 a month. If the individual was going to be on waiver, and say they had $1,200 a month, they would have to pay that other $500 in liability to essentially get them down to what that 100% of the federal, of the Social Security, of what that rate that is that they're allowed to have, that allowance. We increased it to 300%, which essentially means, using my example, they could have like $2,100 and $2,100-ish dollars. It's math. I'm sorry. But they could have that much more before they're going to have to contribute. So in the past, anybody was having to, when they hit that 700 threshold, if any income above that, they were having to pay that in patient liability. So we had individuals that, again, they had a patient liability sometimes as low as $1, but in some of the waivers, in particular like brain injury, where it was an individual who had worked before, so they had more resources, they were paying patient liabilities of, up to $1,500 or $2,000 a month. For their services. So it really, and it did not allow, when you think about today's economy and what, housing cost and what utilities cost, the 700, allowing them to have that much in income did not really afford them to be able to pay for safe housing, to be able to pay for their utilities. So this allowed them to retain more of their income. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Thank you. Thank you. Senator Nemes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you define qualified employee?
Absolutely. So just if we're talking about our run-of-the-mill direct support professional, it is someone who is over the age of 18 who can pass a criminal background check and a drug screen.
Thank you. And can I make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
I better say yes.
Thank you. We do have, and we will have a skilled labor shortage. Fortunately, you're not asking for much in skilled labor. But for the comment on unemployment, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. But until we address the training and education of our skilled employees, we are continually going to have a disconnect between job openings and the skills to fill those job openings. Fortunately and unfortunate that you can't find employees that you don't need those kind of skills. So, Mr. Chairman, your point to these type of jobs is true. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up on the comments that you made from the perspective of this topic, we serve about 750 children and adults in our organization in West Kentucky and Paducah. And when we're fully staffed, we have about maybe a little over 100 full-time, part-time PRN employees, not including those that we contract with. So, we have struggled to get employees. We've had to close down a classroom at our child care center. We advertise our positions, and it's through one of the national services where you have to pay a fee for every look that it gets. Well, we would get hundreds of looks, and we were getting to where we were paying a few $1,000s for these ads, so I had to stop it. So I can't afford to advertise because we get all of these hits that we have to pay for, and then none of them show up. We get interviews scheduled, we make call after call, they don't show up. So in this setting, what the chair said is exactly right. That's what's going on. And I just checked. We actually had a career fair today that we publicized everywhere we could. We had 10 people show up. You can't compete against a government that pays people to sit home. You cannot compete about that. And then you have a governor who gets out and touts how great our economy is when the government is footing the bill for the economy. That's not reality, and it can't last. And it's very frustrating to hear those things when, as an employer, you're struggling to get through each day. We've got families that don't have child care today because we've got a classroom closed, because people are getting paid to sit home. And our governor wants to brag about that Kentucky's economy is booming. Well, of course it's booming. When the government is giving you money to go spend every day, it's going to be booming. There's going to be a price to pay for all of this, and it is our children, our grandchildren who are going to pay the price, and we are doing a disservice at the state level and certainly at the federal level with the decisions that are being made today. And Mr. Chairman, I'll get off my soapbox.
Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I listen, I guess the question would be to the commissioner or Director Smith, either one, from the Navigate report study that was done. Would it be correct to say we essentially gained zero from that report?
I wouldn't say that we gained zero from that report. We have implemented some recommendations that we could within the current framework of our operations. But we do have some other recommendations, and that's one of the reasons we're having these conversations here today, because there were recommendations on assessments, there were recommendations for other things within those waivers. So I do think that we did get something out of that report, and if nothing else, again, these conversations that we're having today are very important to moving the healthcare needle of those members that we're serving in the waiver programs. And it's also highlighted some of the issues that we have surrounding assessments, for example. And I would defer to Director Smith if she has some additional comments to make about the Navigant report and the benefits that we did receive from that report.
I think that you're right on target, that we, I think we're hampered by the fact that at that time that the focus was on essentially shifting the pieces of the pie around. But I think we learned a lot of good information from that. They essentially helped us reform our stakeholder engagement process. There were a lot of recommendations that I think towards the end of the presentation, if you look, that we have implemented some of those as we could. And I think it gives us a point from, we're not starting from zero as we look to continuing to reform those going forward, to reform the waivers. And I wanted to give you all a little more information on, I pulled up our FMAP, our plan that we submitted to CMS, and to talk about the network. And I wanted to just share one thing that I'm really excited about. One, we're dedicating 35% of those dollars to our workforce and provider development. So, that will include addressing, some of the kind of one-time incentive and recovery payments. But what we're looking at for growth is developing a central employee registry to where we can have, where individuals that are doing participant directed services as well as providers can go and look, and we can build a base of eligible employees. that can facilitate hiring, as well as looking. Senator Carroll, you made me think of this when you were talking about career fair. Is that we want to engage in those. A lot of times when you hear direct support professional, immediately somebody thinks of a certified nursing assistant or a personal service attendant at a hospital. These jobs are so much more than that. I mean, you are directly involved in the most intimate parts of somebody's lives, and you are directly responsible for them being able to engage in the community and advance their goals. So we really want to focus on that, and really we want to advance that as a job and how important that job is. And some of that knowledge and those studies came directly from that Navigant work group and the stakeholder sessions and the individual work groups that we had that were comprised of providers. So I do think that it gave us a lot of valuable information. So I don't think that it was a waste.
Thank you all for your answer. And I want to get to a bigger point with that question. I'm glad we did get some information that was productive for our $6 million. And I'm not picking on this particular study, just it happens to be the topic of today's conversation. But I'm wondering, because you're right, we need to increase funding not only for the programs but for the employees, as we need to look at cost of living adjustments for the first time in well over a decade for all of our state employees. Quite frankly, we're behind. But I have to begin to ask the question, just how much are we as a state government spending on hiring outside companies to do reports at millions and millions and millions of dollars a year, and we're getting zero return, essentially? We might get a little good information here, a little good, but is that worth $6 million that we could have used to pay the providers more? And it's not, I'm not picking here on this cabinet, because this is just one study of untelling how many's been done the last 3-4 years across state government. The question is that really a good use of taxpayer dollars when we have the cabinet that we're just talking with today that needs more funding, when we got state employees that's in need of cost of living adjustments? And we really have to narrow down our focus on how we're spending the tax dollars and make sure we're spending them wisely. And I think we need to take a look at all these outside groups, because it sounds to me like the groups doing the outside so-called reports or studies are the ones that's benefiting the most from this. And it's just an observation and comment, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Blanton, the newly constituted Legislative Oversight Committee might take that up. And you talk about other cabinets. You and I have a lot of involvement in the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, and it appears that there are quite a bit of those. Representative Jenkins and Senator Howell's next. Representative Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to offside say amen to what you just talked about, Representative Blanton. And Commissioner Smith, you kind of addressed this. I'm afraid that if people were watching this committee, they would think that any breathing person that didn't have a criminal background check is appropriate to work in these facilities, and that's just not true. It takes someone very, very special to work with one of our most vulnerable populations. So it's beyond just lack of workforce issues, and there are workforce issues. I will not deny that, but the fact that for these very, very specialized, very, very vulnerable populations that folks are working with, the fact that we're paying $10 an hour is, I think, something we should all be very concerned about. I will say that we're just coming out of a pandemic, one that the likes of which we have never seen before. And I think it's changed a whole lot about the way we do business, the way government does business, the way private industry does business. Things have just changed. And I think a little bit more of our fellow Kentuckians, that I think folks are making the best decisions they can for their families and themselves. And we know that women have been a big casualty of this pandemic, that we have more women unemployed ever before. And it could be that they are thinking that that lower income job is not worth what it costs them to put their kids in childcare. And so I think there's a change that has come through our communities, and we should offer each other a little more grace sometimes than we're doing here. There is a problem. The problem is very complex. The child care industry has been decimated, and in many parts of the state, there is still a huge need for that. You can't go back to work if you don't have a safe place for your kids. If you've been unemployed for a period of time, and a lot of our folks have, and there have been problems with unemployment, you don't have the clothes that you need. You may have to buy a uniform. You may have to buy clothes. So let's think about how everyone lives. Not everyone lives the way we do. A lot of people were paycheck to paycheck pre-pandemic, and it's gotten much worse for them. I look for the day that we have everyone employed who is employable. But boy, these positions we're talking about today, $10 an hour, I hope that we can do something to move that needle so that we have people who want to be in those jobs, who have that heart for those jobs, and that you all have the applicants that you need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Howe.
Thank you. This question is from Ms. Stade. And forgive me, I'm still on the learning curve on some of this. The people you represent, does that include your small service providers in our rural areas?
Yes, it did. Primarily, we are small service providers.
Have we seen a decrease in the number of those providers that are able to make it increased demands of COVID on their services?
Yes. And to be honest with you, over the past 6 months, all of the providers and all of my members who have had to make the difficult decision to close down have been in rural areas where these providers were already scarce.
Who soaks up the demand for these services when these, and quite a few, as I understand it, number of these providers go out of business?
Well, it's complicated. So there are provisions in place. If you're a residential provider, for example, you can't just close down. You have to give notice to the state, and actually you have to keep in operation and in business until every single last one of the individuals that you serve has received another residential placement. This is difficult sometimes because agencies who serve some very high needs individuals often cannot find placements for them. So sometimes what happens is individuals are reinstitutionalized, which is obviously not best for the individual and not great for the Commonwealth because it's a lot more expensive. So they either go to another provider or they get reinstitutionalized, which obviously the state tries to avoid at all costs. They only do that when it's the only option available. But during COVID, when, providers have closed down, it's been incredibly difficult to find referrals and make referrals because, as I stated earlier, agencies, while they have capacity, don't have the workforce to take on anyone new. So we have had situations where some providers have had to remain open longer than they would have liked or anticipated to make sure that those individuals are cared for during the referral process.
What happens in the gap when, as my understanding, the providers have to give a 60-day notice, I believe?
30 day.
What happened? Pardon me?
It's 30 days.
30 days. What happens if they're not placed in that 30 days? They can't close down if they don't have the funds to operate. Where do they get help in that gap?
That's a great question. That's a big question mark. Obviously, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services tries its best to help providers find referrals. The case managers on the team try their best. Everyone tries their best. But if there's not a referral, it's really difficult.
Amy, can I help you a little bit?
Yeah.
With that. So we actually there will be assigned staff within either within Medicaid or within one of our sister agencies, depending on what waiver an individual is in. But we work directly with the provider and with the case managers and helping them to find placement for those individuals. But every single, from the moment that we get notified, because they have to notify us first, from the moment we receive that notification, providers and their staff engaged with them, sometimes going on site, participating in person-centered team meetings, meeting with family members to facilitate getting them placed in a different residential setting, or even if it is not a residential service, it is, for example, an adult day service, or somebody that's providing attendant care. But we follow them from the time we get notice of discharge to when they receive services from another agency.
Is there one of these provider groups? There's 6 of them. Is there one particular area where that are closing down more than others? Adult daycare, Michelle P. What are they? Are they across the board, or are they constituted?
Our home and community based providers right now are the ones that we have had. So that is comprised of adult days and some of the home health agencies, but we are down to 154 enrolled providers to serve about 13,000 people right now.
And are those in particular? I know in Louisville for adult daycare, there's a lot more coming online. I know there's a CON process. The CON process, I don't know if it's keeping anybody out or not. I don't know. But so is it Louisville? It doesn't seem like that's a problem in Louisville. There's plenty of providers in Louisville for adult daycare. So is that a more rural issue?
It varies. So we've most recently, for example, with brain injury, we're having trouble with providers in Fayette County. So it varies. So we have, sometimes it is the more rural areas. Sometimes it, is the far western region, far eastern region that we have issues. It really depends on what the provider type and the waiver. But it's really sporadic. There's not a set pattern. And so for the adult days, they don't have to go through the CON program. So that does not cause a barrier.
I think adult days do have to go through CON program. The attendant care does not, but the adult days.
But the actual building, yes. I'm sorry. We have many adult days that are coming on to provide attendant care.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Senator Carroll.
Mr. Chairman, the only final comment to make is we have this discussion about pay, and not just in this area, but in every area. There are obviously hundreds of millions of dollars, federal dollars, coming down to help in this area. And my concern is that as we do this and as we make these investments, and it is nice. I got to walk around yesterday and hand bonus checks out with federal money. It was great. Our pay scale, we bumped our pay scale up in this area for DSPs and teachers. We bumped both of those areas up pretty significantly. So I don't think this is a problem we can buy our way out of right now. But the money was there. That's what it was for. My concern is that these organizations that in a couple years, they play the game of this artificial economy that we have. And so the market is not dictating pay. It's basically the federal government that's dictating pay. And when all this funding goes away in a year and 2 years, what's going to happen then? What if these organizations aren't able to keep up revenue to be able to pay these pay scales? What do we do then? And I know with some of them, some of the funding goes out maybe 2-3 years in child care. That's kind of what they're looking at. And hopefully if there are more federal dollars and Amy and I were just talking about that when they come down, it will be over a period of years where the impact will be controlled. But there is no guarantee with that. But that's just something to think about, is just the impacts of that when through a false economy, we're driving wages. And when that false economy goes away and we rely on the real economy and we fall into a recession, what's going to happen? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments from any of the presenters? All right, while we were here, I just want to read a text message. A provider from Louisville texted me, and he says, please convey that I have many employers who have many openings and 10% of the applicants show up. It's government competition. Our businesses are competing against the government. Anyway, thank you, and we are adjourned.